One of the things that surprised me the most about In a Lonely Place is it's one of the few film noir, pictures I've seen in which the female protagonist is not a femme fatale. The only other two I can think of are Laura and Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. I do include, however, I will include Laura in the nurturing woman category here. I mean, she actually helps him a lot. She inspires him to finish his script. She helps him, cut back on his drinking. She is a little more worldly, however, than most, nurturing women. She's a failed actress and she's been in and out of a few relationships. In opposition though, how it's the to most film noir film, it's the male lover who is the one who here is potentially deadly. Angela Martin writes, the literal translation of the French term femme fatale is fatal woman. Dictionary definitions include causing or capable of causing death, ruinous, disastrous, decisively important, destined, inevitable. The femme fatale carries all these levels of meaning, hence the easy slippage from deadliness to sexuality as weapon. Outside of the references to sexuality, I think actually Dix falls into most of these categories. He is what I believe the male counterpart to the femme fatale, the homme fatale. The homme fatale is a little bit different from the femme fatale. It's not so much a sexual hold over a character; it's more of a psychological hold, and you see that as the film progresses. Laurel is afraid of him. She sees him almost beat somebody to death, over a minor fender bender, and she knows she needs to leave him, but she's unable to because she's scared to death of what he's going to do to her. So the next film I'm looking at by Ray is called Johnny Guitar, and it stars Joan Crawford as Vienna. She owns a saloon that's going to be very busy once the railroad comes through. The cattle people in the area, though, don't want the railroad to come through, and they're trying to run Vienna out of the territory, and they're led by Emma Small, who is, who owns most of the town, and Emma is, sort of Vienna's rival for the affections of the dancing kid, who leads a group of miners who are accused at the beginning of the film of robbing a stagecoach, even though they didn't do it. In the meantime, the title character, Johnny Guitar, shows up, and he turns out he's a musician, but he's also Vienna's former lover and very, very good with a gun. So as the film progresses, the dancing kid and his group, decide to become the villains the townspeople think they are by robbing the bank. Emma agrees to, accuses Vienna of also being an accomplice, and because she owns everything, the townspeople go along with her. So for the rest of the movies, basically, Emma and the other town, people, the cattle ranchers, forming a lynch mob going after Vienna, and who Vienna knows that she's going to have to face Emma at the end, and they do, and face each other in a gun battle at the end. So Pam Cook writes, perhaps the nearest Hollywood has come to feminist western, Johnny Guitar predates the modern women's movement by more than a decade and does not deal with social issues at all. So like in A Lonely Place, the main character, Vienna, kind of assumes the role that normally would have been, played by a male character. At the end of the film, it's, she's the one who has to stand up for herself, and she's the one who has to, kill in order to stay alive. Johnny Guitar, despite his, abilities with a gun, he did save her from being hanged in the film. However, he spends most of his time trying to convince her to run away. Many critics who see the film feel that Johnny Guitar, Emma is actually attracted physically to Vienna and doesn't know how to deal with it. It's not, and she hates her so much not because of the rivalry for the dancing kid, but because she herself is attracted to Vienna. Jennifer Peterson, in the competing tune to Johnny Guitar, argues that Emma is made freakish by the very rigidity of her sexual identity. American audiences didn't know what to make of Johnny Guitar. They weren't used to a female, protagonist, shooting people. And I think over the years it's, gotten a reputation as being a camp classic. Oh, I don't really see it though, and my daughter actually watched it with me, and she sees Vienna as a very strong woman and likes the movie very much. So the next section is called Recognizing Minority Causes, and the director I'm going to look at this time is Anthony Mann. After World War II, there were a lot of movies that came out that looked at social problems. They included The Lost Weekend, which is about alcoholism, Best Years of Our Lives, which is all about soldiers returning home. And then Elie Kazan also made a couple films, that dealt with racism and anti-Semitism. So Anthony Mann's best known. He was a very prolific director of westerns, but he's best known for the 8 movies he made with James Stewart, from 1950 to 1955, and that movies actually helped Stewart reinvent his career as more of an action hero. And 5 of the movies were westerns, and most of them fall into that vengeance quest, psychological western category. So the first movie I'm looking at by him is Border Incident. It's all about Mexican braceros. They've been smuggled into the U.S. They're going back to Mexico after the season has ended, and they're killed and robbed by bandits who then bury them in quicksand. 2 federal agents, one from Mexico and one from the U.S., are looking into these disappearances, and so they both go undercover. One of them becomes a bracero trying to enter the United States illegally. The other one pretends to be a criminal trying to sell work permits. Both of them eventually end up at a ranch run by Owen Parkson, and that fronts as for an illegal or immigration operation. So it's interesting, in today's political climate, to see that there was a movie about illegal immigration as far back as 1948. But there were a couple of things going on at the time. There was what was called the El Paso incident. It was about, local government officials who, actually smuggled, 4,000 braceros into the U.S. to work on the farms after there was a disagreement between Mexico and the U.S. and the program for braceros coming in was temporarily suspended. There was also a documentary called Poverty in the Land of Plenty, which stated that headhunters, were smuggling workers from Mexico to take the place of striking workers. This was actually wrong, and the farm that the documentary was accusing sued the producers and eventually won. So one of the biggest surprises, for Border Incident when I was watching it was that Burns, the American agent, is actually killed. He's run over by a tractor when he's trying to escape from the ranch. And so, Jonathan Auerbach, felt the same way, and he says that the fact that the white American dies, not the Mexican, clearly complicates Border Incident's national and racial hierarchies. So yeah, and a couple other things I think are really interesting is that it's a Mexican actor, Ricardo Montalban, who was given top billing in the film. Also, in the braceros, are treated with compassion, even though they're trying to, break the law by coming into the U.S. The other movie, and the final one I'm looking at in this presentation, is called The Devil's Doorway. It's all about a Native American who's just returned home from the Civil War. He's received the Medal of Honor, and he's thinking that things will, be better now than they were before. However, there's still a racist attitude towards Native Americans, and it's gotten worse. He can no longer buy a drink in the saloon, and then his father dies when the white doctor won't take care of him. And there's also at the same time a racist attorney who is trying to start a range war by bringing in more and more homesteaders, hoping to wipe out all of the Native Americans in the territory. Poole, tries to work legally to stop all this, but nothing works for him, and he knows he's going to have to fight and even kill to hold on to what's rightfully his. So Jim Kitsis says that the characters of Anthony Mann are extreme men stretching out beyond their reach. Rarely is a matter of choice. As a possessed, these men push ahead completely at the mercy of forces within themselves. Whether apocalyptic or divine, the vessels of a vision or a disturbance, they have little hope of the settled relationships within which most men live. Typically, they are driven to sacrifice or reject the complex ties of families and society. And this is a little bit different in Devil's Doorway because, Poole wants those ties only he's the one being rejected. It's very rare to see a movie, that actually took place, made in 1950 that came from a Native American point of view. But there was another one. Broken Arrow was released earlier in the year and it was a big hit. It was all about a soldier and the Native American chief, Cochise, forming a pact to make peace. You would think that these two films coming out, at the same time would be a sign of better things. However, that wasn't the case. Westerns still, portrayed Native Americans as savages. And Philip Loy says that increasingly Westerns focused on conflict between the two races and made little effort to understand either Indian culture or the white settlement of the western frontier from an Indian perspective. The dominant image of Indians is one of savage opposition to whites. Indians, increasingly, Apaches kill whites simply because they are there to be killed. In a lot of the psychological Westerns, when Native Americans do appear, sadly, they are just, tools to move the plot forward. Even Anthony Mann, used them in this way. In his film of The Man from Laramie, they were the ones that sold the guns, that bought the guns from, the villain, and the guns eventually were used in a massacre that killed the main character's brother. So I'm going to close. My final thoughts are that, it's, the filmmakers that I've looked at show that you don't have to follow a preset formula if you're making a Western or a film noir. Fritz Lang, he used the psychological Western to show the cost of vengeance, and then used the formula again, to make one of his most compelling noir films. Nicholas Ray showed, that female characters didn't have to fall into stereotypes, and Anthony Mann, brought into spotlight characters who didn't receive the exposure they deserved. Although the film noir and the Western are not as prominent in today's cinematic landscape, they still make appearances from time to time. Gone Girl and The Revenant, for instance, are both fine examples of the modern film noir and the Western, respectively. Furthermore, the filmmakers of the 1950s who worked in more than one motion picture genre helped pave the way for modern directors like Quentin Tarantino and Joel and Ethan Coen, all of whom have successfully made films in both the noir and Western categories. This concludes my capstone presentation. In the words of singing cowboy and Cincinnati native Roy Rogers, whom I once had the pleasure of seeing in person outside of a Roy Rogers restaurant in Florence, happy trails to you until we meet again.